Have you ever seen a diary that writes new words by itself every night? Do you believe there are souls who don't want to be set free, but only want you to remember the pain they once endured? And what if the house you live in was once the site of a betrayal that spanned even the flesh and blood of the unborn? Welcome back to Whisper Horror Channel, where stories that have faded are lulled back from the other side of the labyrinth of memory. Don't forget to subscribe, turn on notifications, and leave a comment. I don't need a new home if it costs me my peace. Tonight, let's open the door to the Amityville house, where the Harper family unintentionally moved in, bringing with them both kindness and fear, to face something that is not just a ghost, but a judgment written in the blood of their ancestors that no one has dared to read to the end. This is The Debt Bearer and the Blood Diary, a lullaby not for the faint of heart. The Amityville sky was covered in a thin gray veil as the Harper family's old pickup truck slowly rolled down the end of the gravel road, nestled among the bare birch trees of late autumn. The air was thick with the smell of mold and sap, each gust of wind carrying a biting cold that made the window panes rattle slightly in the old house ahead. It was the Harper family's first encounter with the place that would change their lives, a new beginning where no one foresaw the abyss beneath that seemingly ordinary exterior. James Harper, a father who had weathered many storms, was the first to step out of the car. His broad shoulders seemed to stiffen, his face, etched with crow's feet, furrowed at the sight of the gloomy, moss-covered tiled roof house that he had determinedly bought with the hope of healing his family's trauma. But in the depths of James's eyes, a faint worry arose, like an old memory still aching amidst the silent dark circles. Laura stepped onto the wet grass, gently pulling her wool scarf around her neck. She felt a cold draft pass through her thick coat as if someone was whispering in her ear, and instinctively turned her head to look back at the dark wooden shuttered windows, like countless mysterious eyes. Laura reassured herself with a forced smile at James, telling herself not to let the vague worry ruin the new beginning the whole family had been looking forward to. Zoe got out, phone held high, live streaming the very first moment she set foot in this unhinged vibe-filled Amityville legacy. As she exclaimed to her friends with a giggle, Zoe's eyes sparkled in a space full of potential drama, eager to explore every hidden corner, though beneath the rebellious eccentricity, the 18-year-old girl was still carefully listening for unnameable signals emanating from the old house. Lucas, slouching behind, his backpack clinking with electronic devices, his eyes following the weak Wi-Fi signal flickering on the screen. He immediately checked the router, tapping quickly on his phone to access social media groups complaining about the dead zone, not bothering to pay attention to the heavy atmosphere that grew with every step closer to the front door. The wooden door creaked open, the sound of the hinges echoing, as if someone was stifling a sob. The Amityville house was revealed with a long dark hallway, stained walls, and faded wavy wallpaper like distant memories. Walking along the faint light remaining in the late day, each Harper family member was drawn into their own world. James searched for a power outlet, trying to ignore the sound like the sighing of floorboards each time he stepped firmly. Laura's eyes scanned the scene, where the kitchen's old door was a faded yellow, her chest tightening with the feeling that this place had once been marked by footsteps other than her family's. Zoe was excited to explore every room, constantly using filters to film the rotting pitted ceiling, with the comment, "Dead ass, who would stay here unless they wanted a fresh start with a ghost?" Lucas silently tracked the network cable, his lips mumbling curses at the internet speed that was slower than dial-up from a decade ago. The early sunset was falling, making the darkness in the house even thicker. At that moment, while trying to move a heavy box in the basement storage room, Zoe accidentally bumped into a hollow section of the wall. A strange clack echoed from behind the wooden planks, making all four of them stop. James walked over, shone his flashlight into the newly revealed gap, tapped it lightly, and heard an unusual hollow echo. Before the family's waiting curiosity, James skillfully pried off a plank, revealing a low doorway leading down to a basement space that had never been noted on the house's blueprint. Dust and moldy smoke billowed up, glistening in the pale light. Zoe and Lucas led the way down with their phone flashlights, their feet echoing with a chilling clang on the rotting wooden steps. In the dusty, gloomy room, the two siblings discovered an antique iron chest, wrapped in worn black velvet. Inside, standing out from a pile of faded papers and relics, was an old diary, its leather cover peeling, the front decorated with a crescent moon, faint, illegible words, seemingly written by someone with blood mixed with red wax. Zoe's hand trembled as she turned the cracked first pages, mumbling the first line, "The day I came to this place." Everything changed. The house is my own, but it is also the house of those who do not sleep. Lucas glanced at it, automatically live-streaming the image of the diary, but the screen flickered as if interfered with by someone. It seemed the secret room was slowly awakening to their presence. The first dinner took place under a faint yellow light, around a wooden table pushed against a thick, dusty window pane. On the surface, the family tried to create a cheerful atmosphere, with small humorous stories that Zoe brought up to boost the good vibes, as she said. But the chill of the strange smoke wafting through the crack in the door made everyone lose their appetite. It was then that Zoe, with a mischievous look, opened the diary and read a passage aloud for the family. Whoever lives in this house, remember, your dearest loved ones will become your most terrifying enemies. Lucas burst out laughing, thinking his sister was trolling, while Laura fell silent, her hand unconsciously gripping the edge of her chair. James sternly told the family not to be superstitious, that it was just a useless old book. Night fell. In her upstairs room, Zoe sat huddled by a slightly open window, her eyes never leaving the yellow diary. Just as she hesitated to read the next obscure lines, the live stream she intended to send her friends was suddenly interrupted, the screen flashing an error message. Connection lost. Are you still there? The wind whistling outside the window mingled with a faint echoing whisper from somewhere. Zoe shivered, feeling that every character she had just read had turned into a seed of misfortune in the flesh and blood of this house. The Amityville night was thick with cold wind, and the rustling of insects in the darkness, as if they knew something. Since Zoe read the first lines of the old diary, the atmosphere of the Harper house seemed to change every day. Everything became slower. The color of the walls faded. The cheerful laughter of the family members gradually gave way to anxious looks and disjointed sighs. Zoe sat on the floor of her bedroom, the faint yellow lamp casting a moldy glow on the diary pages, her eyes showing the exhaustion of many sleepless nights. She mumbled the old passages, unsure if she was trying to decipher them, or if she was obsessed and couldn't break free. The memories in her dreams and reality gradually mixed, the bright images of family dinners suddenly turning into a dark scene, where every face was cold, their eyes blood-red like wild beasts guarding the gates of hell. Sometimes as Zoe stood in the kitchen, her parents and brother would suddenly turn their backs, whispering to each other in a language no one understood, then all look at Zoe with empty eyes, a mix of pity and gloom. Waking up from every heavy dream, Zoe felt as if every cell in her body was frozen. Once, waking up near dawn, she found her feet cold and wet from a small puddle on the floor, even though no one had spilled water and the windows were tightly shut. Some nights, from the hallway, there was a sound of tiptoeing footsteps, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, stopping outside her bedroom door. But when Zoe's eyes snapped open, she only saw the light bulb flickering, the light sweeping across the wall like a giant winking eye, mocking her. Lucas was the first to notice his sister's change. Before, Zoe would prank him, play games with him, and talk about super Gen Z vibe topics. But now Zoe often complained, was easily angered, and sometimes remained silent for hours, and even when Lucas tried to make jokes, he couldn't make her laugh like before. Lucas was suspicious, so he looked back at the livestream footage from the night Zoe read the diary, and found the video file was corrupted. Towards the end, a strange whistling sound appeared, and the image blurred as if a dark shadow passed across the screen. Not only had Zoe changed, but the relationship between Lucas's parents also became tense as a violin string. Even in small conflicts, dishes put in the wrong place, the alarm clock going off earlier than usual, power outlets constantly tripping, could be reasons for James and Laura to argue. Laura was acutely aware of the growing frustration, thinking that her husband's irritability was just a result of the stress of moving. But day by day, the sharp words, the slow controlling gazes, and the unnameable resentment grew, to the point where Laura doubted if there was something wrong with her, while James was confused because every time he got angry, a vague reminder echoed in his head. You are just a shadow. You are the one who pushes everything into the abyss. Returning to the basement room where Zoe and Lucas had found the diary, every time they went down there, it felt like they were being sucked into another world. Their flashlights and phones cast a faint, weak light. On the wooden walls, new scratches appeared, sometimes small as fingernail marks, sometimes long and winding, like invisible writing. Lucas felt that all the tech devices in the house were no longer completely under his control. His computer rebooted on its own in the middle of the night. Security cameras captured unusual footage. A chair moving a few centimeters by itself, a wall clock running backward. Lucas began searching for the house's history on Reddit forums and mystical urban groups. Fragmented clues popped up: the infamous Amityville murder case, with suspicions of an unresolved curse, witnesses speaking of incessant whispers, and a madness that came in the night, making Lucas hesitant, his heart pounding, growing more afraid as he realized the signs matched his house day by day, hour by hour. Laura silently played the role of the peacemaker in the kitchen. Some mornings when she woke up, she would hear a piano playing in the living room, even though no one was touching it. The strange music sent shivers down her spine, with long pauses like silent grievances. The paintings Laura had been working on recently had darker patches of color, and her brushstrokes overlapped as if another hand intervened and guided her while she was absorbed in the shades. Sometimes during dinner, Laura saw James's figure blur before her eyes, as if he were wearing a dusty camouflage hat, and Lucas's face was distorted under the light, his eyes sunken, his skin glistening as if dipped in water. As for Zoe, the whispers became more frequent, mixing with disjointed, mournful, reminding and instigating phrases. "They will betray you. They will harm you," kept repeating like a tape loop in her head, becoming clearer each time she read the diary. From being haunted, Zoe became wary. Deep down she began to keep her distance, looking at her father, mother, and brother with suspicious eyes. She locked all her social media accounts, spoke less, and her rebellious attitude was replaced by an anxious mystery. From the second-floor hallway, the lights flickered every night, a figure gliding past the crack in the door, the slow footsteps never quite clear. James woke up many times from a daze, dreaming he was standing in front of a mirror, but his reflection was smiling faintly, beckoning him to join. Lucas saw his network data increase abnormally, log files recording strange accesses from unknown IP addresses, all originating from within his own home network. The climax was reached on a late, silent night. Outside, rain pattered like fingers tapping on the window pane. Zoe struggled with another dream. She saw herself screaming, running through the house's hallway. Behind her, the sound of footsteps, a chorus of ghostly whispers. She woke with a start, opening her eyes in the thick darkness. In front of her bedroom door, in the dim moonlight, a tall, thin figure appeared, its shape unfamiliar, its deep eyes staring directly at Zoe, unblinking. Zoe's breath hitched. She trembled and stood up, intending to move closer when the dark figure dissolved into thin air, leaving the hallway empty and terrifying. Zoe no longer knew if she was dreaming or awake, only that her heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. The biting cold and panic completely enveloped Zoe. In her confusion, she felt that fear was no longer a personal obsession, but had permeated every link of her family, dividing, darkening, and creating doubt, as if they were caught in a trap of invisible forces no one was brave enough to name. After the heavy days passed slowly with the gray sunset over the Amityville rooftop, the house, with its mournful soul, began to awaken the darkness hidden in every corner. No longer an invisible bond, the curse in the diary had gradually consumed the flesh and blood of each person, suffocating all the warm sounds that had once existed in the Harper household. James got up early every day, lingering on the cold steps instead of having breakfast with his wife. In his eyes, a look of resentment always lingered. A couple of times walking past the dining table, he would hastily shove a chair aside, the one where Lucas used to diligently work on his computer, and look around with a suspicious eye at something so small it seemed insignificant. Dinner in the house became a silent battlefield, the ticking of the clock, scrutinizing glances, James's gnarled hands tapping lightly on the table, each beat making Laura jump. Sometimes just a dish he didn't like would enrage him. He would throw the bowl against the wall, the shattering ceramics echoing like a snapping string. Laura froze, her heart pounding, her lips trembling, not daring to say anything more than a moment of resigned bowing of her head. As night fell, arguments blanketed the wind, shouting echoing from the living room, accompanied by curses, harsh words, an unnamable resentment accumulating every night. Laura walked like a shadow, her slender fingers becoming chapped from scrubbing the kitchen. She lost weight quickly, her eyes showing clear dark circles, her pale cheeks hiding a fear that lay dormant in her eye sockets. Laura no longer had the courage to sit opposite her husband. She quietly guarded herself, sometimes startling at the feeling that someone was always watching her from behind, a gaze lurking in the dark hallway, pulling her down into an abyss of worry.
Every night, Laura woke up to a groaning cry, at first echoing from the basement, then gradually sounding as if it came directly from her own chest. At times she sat for hours on the stairs, listening to the rain lashing the broken roof tiles, asking herself how long she could endure this labyrinth of fear. Zoe, once so full of ginzy swagger, was now a huddled figure by a closed window, the diary with its stained ink always clutched tightly to her chest. The old faint words constantly haunted her mind. Sometimes Zoe would quietly write down her family's life in disjointed notes, in a separate diary, afraid that the faster she forgot, the more misfortune could consume her at any moment. In her dreams, Zoe saw her mother's eyes filled with tears of blood, Lucas hissing like a wild animal fleeing from his father's roaring shadow, and James, his face twisted, contorting into a smile that was not of this world. Waking up, Zoe always found a streak of cold water beneath her bed. When darkness enveloped the house, Lucas could only lock himself in his room, his eyes weary on the flickering screen. Algorithms and filters could not ward off the fear, and articles about the house's history kept popping up with warnings. The gut-wrenching curse, tearing apart every cell of family trust. Lucas typed on his keyboard, trembling, glancing at the strange IPs accessing their home network from somewhere very close, very real. A couple of times he heard footsteps behind him, a dragging, slow rhythm down the hallway, then stopping right in front of his closed door. Lucas turned around. No one was there but the steady tick-tock of his computer, yet the feeling of being hunted never subsided for a moment. The fire of conflict burned fiercely. One night in the middle of the night, Zoe suggested the whole family talk, hoping to find a bit of old warmth. But the evening turned into a battlefield. James flew into a rage when he discovered the TV remote was not in its place. Laura let slip a complaint about his patriarchal nature, and Lucas quietly retreated from the table. James slammed his hand on the tabletop, the sound of breaking echoing. In just a moment, every piece of glass, decaying wood, and what little trust remained, shattered like an old rotten layer of glaze. Laura's cries mingled with Zoe's rebellious shouts, and Lucas was silent, his lost eyes trying to hold on to the definition of family. In the following days, the house seemed to have a will of its own. Windows would automatically fly open even if they were securely locked, cold wind rushing in as if a hand was reaching for their necks. A sobbing cry echoed throughout the hallway, its origin untraceable. Lights flickered all night. Sometimes the darkness in the kitchen was so thick that one could feel every cold current seeping into their lungs just by breathing. The dining table, wooden chairs and picture frames would occasionally shift out of place, as if an unknown force was restlessly pulling them into a void. Each person was in their own world of fear. Laura would catch sight of James's figure sitting motionless at the end of the hallway, his eyes empty, staring at the lightless moon. James would often have a fleeting feeling of someone squeezing his shoulder while he slept. Opening his eyes, he would only see Zoe's shadow by the window, her lips whispering something that did not belong here. Lucas buried his face in his keyboard, suddenly startled by an anonymous notification on the screen. They are watching. They know. Then came that gloomy night, when all self-control had faded, leaving only a frustration flowing like blood from a long festering wound. James stormed into the living room, in a frantic, delirious rage. His insane kicking and smashing were endless. Shelves collapsed, vases shattered, books flew everywhere, and pieces of the carpet were torn by his leather shoes and bare feet. Desperate screams echoed through the wooden door, cut short by the howling wind sliding across the window panes outside. Laura and Lucas huddled in a corner, their eyes wide with a terror they had never known. Zoe stood not far from them, holding the diary, her fingers trembling, her lips mumbling something amidst the chaos, her heart pounding along with the sound of her breaking heart in her chest. In that heartbreaking early morning, Zoe realized that everything she had ever read, everything the diary had written about families destroying each other, about unresolved resentment, was actually happening around her. The Amityville house was no longer a refuge. It growled and gasped in the very pain of its trapped souls. All four of them were enclosed in a shattered tableau of trust, blood and family bonds, unable to know if they would still recognize each other tomorrow.
After the night of frenzy, the Amityville house was desolate, everything covered in the gloomy grey ash of a resentment that festered in the darkness. The broken furniture lay scattered, new cracks snaking across the walls like the fingers of the drowned clinging to a final refuge. No one dared to speak about what had happened the previous night, for it was beyond imagination, as if a demon had borrowed their bodies to mock all definitions of family bonds. James sat silently by his study window, his face expressionless, his eyes filled with a hazy dark film. Since destroying the living room, the remorse that had yet to be voiced was buried in an undercurrent of doubt. He avoided his wife and children's gazes, locked himself within four walls, trapping all sounds, memories, and shame into a silent evaporation. A couple of times when Laura or Zoe knocked on the door, James would only respond with a grumble or a sharp look, every explanation dismissed like wind sweeping away decaying leaves. Laura drifted through the chilling hallways, unable to distinguish her own footsteps from the breath of the crying woman in the house. The hallucinations grew more intense. At first just a fleeting figure in the mirror, it now became a distorted, pale, sobbing face on the stairs, its pained, soulless eyes following her every move. Powerless against all conventional logic, Laura went online, seeking out private forums about spirits and curses. After many nights of contemplation, she found the phone number of a renowned local medium, texting with trembling hands, "SOS, I need help. Someone or something won't let us go." Meanwhile, Zoe became completely separated from her roots. In her gloomy room, she began writing her own password-protected diary entries, scribbling chaotic, panicked words. "Why does everyone look at me like a stranger? Maybe it's all going to end." No longer engaging with friends or her brother, Zoe feared prying eyes, the awkward questions from her family, and completely avoided communication. For long days, she sat motionless by the misty window, her ear pressed to the wall, listening to the rustling sound from the basement, the clanking of iron chains, the distorted cries, a sound like fingernails scratching wood. She believed that the secret of the house, of everything, lay entirely within the diary, and that she was the only one who truly understood the bizarre thing that was approaching. Lucas, utterly disappointed with his entire family, decided for the first time to break the silence. He brought his laptop and a pile of printed documents about the house's history to Zoe, his voice trembling. "Zoe, we need to talk. Can't you see the things happening in this house? The signs are repeating. The people who live here are being torn apart by some kind of resentment. Have you noticed?" Zoe didn't even look up, her face panicked, her eyes glistening with tears. "Don't mention it. If you can't help, then leave," she almost screamed. Lucas was stunned, having never seen his sister so cold and decisive. Once again, he was pushed to the side, feeling invisible like a lost child, only able to watch from afar as his family's shattered pieces drifted away, unable to save anyone, not even himself. The house began to convulse in pain like a half-dead living organism. Laura grew more and more exhausted by the relentless ghosts. Sometimes she would hear a burst of crying right by her ear, only to turn and find the dining room dark and empty. In the kitchen, dishes would roll off the counter by themselves. On Zoe's bedroom wall, the scratches grew deeper and more prominent, especially at night, when the wind gusted through the door crack, causing the wallpaper to billow and rip. The winds changed smells from icy cold to a fishy metallic odor, then the smell of blood, then a sickeningly sweet smell that made one nauseous. Lucas felt that all the cameras were going blind at dusk. Security files would automatically delete. Chat boxes showed strange characters, and images of the living room were distorted into number sequences and fleeting faces that were not from the house appearing in the video stream. That night, Zoe fell into a horrible nightmare for hours. She was being dragged down a dark hallway, and behind her were her family, their faces cracked, their eyes bleeding, their mouths twisted, screaming curses in a distorted language that only the dead could understand. When she woke up, Zoe heard her own gasping breath echoing throughout the room. Suddenly, the whole family was woken up by her chest-tearing scream. James jumped up, Laura's face drained of color, and Lucas rushed over. They burst into Zoe's room and stood frozen in the flickering light. The walls were covered in scratches, blood mixed with ink in tangled lines, running in every direction. In the long bright red streak were messy words repeated over and over. "It will all end in blood, blood, blood." Zoe collapsed in a cold puddle, her hand still clutching the diary, her eyes wide with despair. No one in the house could utter a word. Each person retreated into a cocoon of horror, feeling as if they had just witnessed the deepest, truest abyss of a nightmare. Laura trembled, making a phone call, her cold hand almost dropping the phone. The last person she could think of at that moment was Gabriel. "SOS, we need you. Please come back. This house, no one can survive it anymore." The ringing echoed in futility, and from the distant street, the sound of a siren was like a funeral dirge for a soul no one could distinguish between living and dead. But only Laura, in that moment of ultimate exhaustion, realized, perhaps with Gabriel, the last hope had not truly died. The Amityville sky was covered in a cold, leaden gray, clouds forming a heavy barrier over the rooftop. The air was damp on the path in front of the gate, covered in moss, and old puddles reflected withered flowers that had fallen long ago. It was the morning the Harper house was most deeply immersed in deadly silence, and it was also when Gabriel appeared. He stood silently at the gate, his figure quiet, his forehead etched with wrinkles, his tired eyes shining with a firm belief. Gabriel didn't rush in, just stood there taking a deep breath, letting every fiber of his being absorb the heavy invisible energy, the smell of resentment, hatred and despair as thick as dust in the fog. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes were calm as if the darkness and danger here were no different from the losses he had swallowed in his life. Gabriel's knock on the door was silent, yet it made the whole house shudder as if someone had just touched the final note of a mournful symphony. Laura was the first to open the door, her face haggard with gratitude and weariness. Her awkward greeting was quickly overwhelmed by the tense atmosphere. James stood at the end of the hallway, looking at Gabriel as if he were a stranger carrying a disease. Zoe huddled close to the wall, her messy hair covering her gaunt cheeks, while Lucas was stunned, a glimmer of hope in his eyes as Gabriel bowed his head to each person. No one said much. All small talk was lost in a wall of prejudice and suspicion. James grumbled, standing with his hands on his hips, his chest heaving. Zoe clutched the diary, her lost gaze briefly sweeping over Gabriel's face, then turning away coldly. Laura was both relieved and anxiously tense, tremblingly pouring a cup of tea to calm her hands. Lucas sat far away, constantly looking towards the door, as if afraid that once Gabriel's presence stirred the air, everything in the house would again emerge like ghosts rushing from a deep cellar. Gabriel chose silence. He followed Laura, asking each person their story in turn. His voice was deep and steady, listening more than guiding. He let each person recount their experiences, without judgment or interruption. James replied coldly, occasionally letting out a sigh, stifling his answers as if not wanting to give voice to his grievances. Laura spoke softly of her hallucinations, the crying, the feeling of being watched, her eyes sometimes unable to meet his. Lucas spoke of the strange noises, the blind cameras, the fear of the nameless IPs that were eating away at their home network every night. Only Zoe was silent at first, her lips pressed tightly, her face full of defensiveness. But when Gabriel's gaze lingered on the diary for a long time, Zoe instinctively and tremblingly turned the frayed pages. His look revealed a pain that understood the horrifying nature of that inanimate object more than anyone else. Gabriel borrowed the diary, reverently taking it with his rough hands. He turned each page, walking slowly in the living room, occasionally stopping when his eyes caught lines of ink darker than the rest, hinting at a thick, dark memory that made the air around him still for a moment. He felt each dense vortex of resentment curling under his fingertips, as if beneath the real skin, imprisoned souls were trembling, demanding to be let out. "This thing," Gabriel said, his voice hoarse, "is a gateway. It traps what refuses to let go, pulling each of you into a deep hole of guilt that you didn't create, but is the result of layers of pain linked together from the very souls that were swallowed in this place." The family went silent. James forced a faint smile, but his biceps were clenched until they were white. Zoe bowed her head, hiding her gaze, and Laura clenched her teacup so it wouldn't fall. Gabriel sighed, sat down at the table, and told everyone to gather. "The resentment here is ancient. It not only drains each person's energy, but also fosters hatred, instilling in your flesh and blood memories that are not your own. That is the real curse, not allowing anyone to forgive anyone, not letting go even in a dream." That night, Gabriel performed a temporary ritual. He placed the diary on a white cloth, burned 3 strands of each person's hair in a small silver bowl, mixed with a little salt water sprinkled around the dining table. The flickering candlelight shone on his face, which was strained as a cloud of smoke curled up, a cold draft rushing from the old pages of the diary, as if trying to choke every family member. Suddenly, the living room darkness swirled violently. The window flew open abruptly, even though it had been securely latched, cold wind lashing their faces. From the diary came a screeching sound like fingernails scratching rotting wood, and the old fake bloodstains took on a fresh new color. Gabriel resisted, sweat beading on his forehead, his hands trembling as he held the ritual items, but his eyes were not afraid but determined, silently enduring the pressure from the other side. After a moment of intense twisting, the candle flame went out, then flared back up, the room chilling into a deadly silence. Everyone looked at Gabriel, gasping and afraid. James was panicked and didn't dare look at anyone. Lucas slumped in a corner, and Laura burst into tears. But in the weak light, Gabriel calmly stood up, wrapping the white cloth around the diary, which was now frozen in stillness.
"This is just the first step," he said, his eyes closing in a moment of weariness. "I have kept this curse outside your hearts tonight, but tomorrow it will find a way to come back. If we don't get to the root, if we don't destroy its source, this house will always be an abyss, waiting for someone to fall. Be prepared. Everyone must face their past, their own fears, otherwise no one will survive until tomorrow." And so that night, for the first time in many days, though still anxious and heavy-hearted, the Harper family could sit together under the Amityville roof, next to Gabriel, a stranger who felt like a confidant, the only one sane enough to wrap up the last hope for a dark night with no way out. The sunrise over the Amityville rooftop came so slowly, it seemed it would never reach the misty window panes. After the ritual the night before, the house was burdened with an unnameable feeling, a gloom that clung to every Harper family member. Gabriel, after a brief rest, began the only work he believed was logical, turning over every possible clue to reach the core soul of the curse. Lucas, quick with technology, was encouraged by Gabriel to work alongside him. They strained every nerve, digging through hundreds of records, town archives, clippings from local newspapers, lists of owners, rows of faded old photos from the county archives. The screen was silently bright in the kitchen, the long lines of text gradually losing their ordinary meaning, becoming a code for something that had been dormant for decades. It was Lucas, with one persistent click in the middle of the night, who stumbled upon the name Evelyn Carter, scattered throughout news reports from the 1940s. She had once lived in this very house, a strange figure in Amityville, renowned for her premonitions, once hailed as a prophet girl, but then everything turned dark when a tragedy first occurred. One gloomy winter day, Evelyn disappeared. No one found her body. No one understood what had truly taken the woman except for rumors of witchcraft, a vengeful injustice, and a mysterious ritual with darkness. Just as Gabriel got a lead, the words in Zoe's diary also began to reveal another layer of meaning. The old diary pages were once stained, but now new words seemed to grow every night. Lonely confessions, mysterious ramblings about a woman being hunted, watched by the villagers, and vulgar songs cursing those who had betrayed her. As Zoe read, she felt her skin itch, and the more she read, the more she realized that her own breathing, her own fear, the resentment in her blood, all were eerily similar to Evelyn's, sending shivers down her spine. Zoe's dreams were no longer just darkness, but were fragments of ancient memories, images of the old house submerged in the sound of resentful wailing. Evelyn was no longer just the past, but seemed to be slowly stepping into the present, using Zoe as a bridge for her unfulfilled desires. In an effort to touch the past, Gabriel decided to meet Mrs. Harding, an old woman who lived quietly on the edge of town, who held in her childhood memory the image of Evelyn Carter. Laura and Gabriel went together, driving down the small road to the rundown apartment. Mrs. Harding spoke slowly, her voice tightening each time she reminisced. Evelyn was once a gentle person, living alone with her elderly mother, until she was accused of witchcraft by a group of people just because she dared to speak out against injustice in the village. Who would believe the cries for help of a female soul, especially when that person refused to bow down and accept their fate? Harding said, shedding tears. She also emphasized, before she disappeared, Evelyn cursed the very bed, roof tiles and wooden walls of the house, a type of transmitted curse that would never be lifted until the betrayed souls were understood and forgiven. Zoe herself sank deeper into the bizarre vortex. The figures in the bathroom mirror, the thin layers of mist lingering around her bed every morning. She always had the feeling that someone, other than her mother, other than the flesh and blood Laura, there was a second mother lurking behind her. Sometimes Zoe heard a faint lullaby, soothing a child mingled with long drawn-out sighs, the wind whistling a curse, "Let me go." Gabriel and Lucas continued to dig into the secret compartments, feeling every foundation brick in the old room that had once belonged to Evelyn. Through intuition and persistence, they discovered a section of the floor that was harder than the rest, and when they removed the layer of dust and dirt, they found a letter wrapped in oilcloth underneath, with the name "To the one hurt by my curse" written on it. The letter tremblingly recounted Evelyn's feeling of despair, the pain of being betrayed, the hatred that had pushed her down a dark path, and a small final wish: "If anyone is patient enough to listen, please let me rest. Please give those who are still alive a way back to a love that is not mixed with hatred." Gabriel pondered, realizing clearly in that moment, the curse cannot be broken by just using strength or rituals. The key is forgiveness, not just forgiving Evelyn, but also for anyone who has been hurt, betrayed, or caught in the cycle of resentment of that misguided community, to be unburdened and step into the light. From here on, the focus of the story is not just fighting supernatural ghosts, but a journey of empathy, liberation, and facing the truth of the past. The final question, like Evelyn's letter, slowly echoed in every room, every diary page, and every anxious heartbeat of Zoe. When the most painful things have been exposed, can we stop the curse from extending through the bloodline, or will we forever become the shadows that cling to each fate?
A persistent north wind whistled through the window panes. The old trees in the garden shook wildly, as if trying to tear themselves from the ground. Inside the house, a chill snaked not only through the door cracks, but also through everyone's spine, planting a heavy, haunting dread. Upstairs, Zoe lay trembling in bed, her hands clutching the now tattered diary, its cover peeling like old scars that had been sealed for a long time. Her face was pale, her eyes deeply sunken, her expression growing so distant that she no longer recognized her own reflection in the mirror. The hallucinations no longer stayed in her dreams. Evelyn Carter appeared around Zoe, at first just a black silhouette gliding past the door, then gradually taking on a clearer form, a cold corner of her mouth, her eyes a mix of doubt and despair, each glance intensifying a layer of memory. Evelyn said nothing, but hovering questions echoed in Zoe's head. Do you know what it feels like to be betrayed? Have you ever been abandoned in the dark? Zoe panicked, mumbling to herself, unconsciously conversing with the ghost, asking, crying, and occasionally letting out an insane laugh as if being manipulated by the deepest strings of her emotions. Gabriel, sensitive to the intense twisting of strange energy around the house, spent most of his time with Zoe. He saw that the girl's eyes no longer held the fire of youth, but instead a layer of gloomy ash, the scratches on her wrists, the signs of chronic insomnia, and the whispers she uttered when she thought no one was listening. Evelyn won't leave you alone, will she? Gabriel asked gently, his hand placed on Zoe's shoulder, slowly conveying warmth. Zoe didn't answer, but her eyes glistened with hot tears, her confusion mixed with a shame she dared not express to anyone. He realized that it was time to attempt a special protective ritual, even though he knew the danger that awaited. That night, Gabriel placed the spiritual conduits on the table, a silver bowl of rainwater, an old bamboo ring, and a red string tied around the diary. He invited the whole family, except for Zoe, who was delirious in her room, to sit together. When Gabriel began to chant the words, a violent cold burst forth to the point where the candles on the table were extinguished, and the window pane flew open on its own even though it had been tightly latched. Laura was trembling, Lucas stiffened, and James rushed to lock the door, but his hand felt as if it were being tightly held, and he couldn't move. A strange sound rang out, the laughter of a woman, the sobs of souls severed from hope. An invisible pressure choked Gabriel's throat, the flickering darkness ferociously trying to eject him from the house. The ritual had to end early, when a picture on the wall shook violently, fell and shattered, and a bloodstain on the old carpet suddenly formed the words, "No one can save anyone." Gabriel knew this nightmare was beyond control. He spoke directly to the family. This thing doesn't just bind Zoe. It feeds hatred with every seed of fear you plant each day, and the more it grows when you doubt each other, the easier you yourselves will become its tools. Downstairs, Laura avoided James, a faint blue bruise now shimmering at the corner of her eye from the arguments and violence that had gone beyond the ordinary. Laura didn't look for a place to hide in the house, but quietly helped Gabriel gather old pieces of paper, each broken amulet, trying to cling to the last belief that hope still existed somewhere beyond the veil of despair. But she too was afraid. As night fell, Evelyn would again walk past the kitchen, her black dress sweeping every stair, her shattered face becoming clearer after each ordeal, her eyes pained and reproachful. James was immersed in alcohol and an inexplicable rage. He always thought it was someone's prank or a nightmare from an old trauma, but all joy had lost its flavor. Sometimes he would hear whispers between his two heartbeats, seeing himself standing in a moonlit cemetery, Evelyn and other angry deceased relatives turning their backs on him. James roared in the middle of the night, but no one answered. Lucas was like a statue under the pale blue light of his screen. He relentlessly scoured old files, data about Evelyn accumulating day by day. His biggest discovery was a painful sense of loneliness. Evelyn was once very loved in her family, but her closest relatives were the ones who turned their backs on her and abandoned her when danger surrounded her. The accusation of witchcraft was just a pretext for their cruelty, and the result was a crushed heart that gave birth to a ghost who was both gentle and deadly. A rainy night came, rain pouring down all the pent-up pain of decades. The sky was torn into a mourning shroud, thunder rumbled, lightning tore through the darkness. In the very middle of the Harper house, Zoe was screaming in her room, and everyone rushed to her door, but this time Evelyn had manifested clearly. A woman in a black dress, her hair disheveled, her pale face exuding a look of desperate pain, her eyes bruised purple as if someone had just gouged out the pupils of faith, stood facing them between life and death. Evelyn spoke with a layered sound of a chest-tearing wail, and the final faint whisper of a frightened child. "You will pay, you will feel all the pain I once endured, until not a single particle of hope remains for you to embrace each other and live as mortals." The air froze. Lauren knelt down, tears streaming. Lucas clung trembling to the bed, and Gabriel stood silently shielding Zoe. He faced Evelyn, placing his hand on his chest. There his heartbeat was like a knocking on a door, calling for light to seep through the wall of ash. "Evelyn, if you want to punish, let me take their place. I will free you, even if I have to walk through all my own darkness." Evelyn fell silent, and a second later, the shimmering space cracked. A few lightning bolts tore the sky, her shadow dissolved, and then flooded the room into countless pairs of sorrowful eyes, each pair weeping tears of blood, shining on the overwhelmed and lost Harper family members. That night passed in silence, but the new nightmare had only just begun. Gabriel, in his promise to everyone, declared he would not give up, even if he had to become a shield for the entire Harper bloodline, even if he had to pay the ultimate price with his pain, as long as he could free Evelyn and save this shattered home from the vicious, unending curse of many generations. A cold wind returned, enveloping every wall and every crack in the old tiled roof, as if wanting to endlessly torment the Harper house that had already run out of warmth. Since Evelyn manifested, every sound in the house had become alien and distorted, holding within them the lingering echoes of a distant time filled with blood and tears. But tonight everything was not just fear. This was a night of decision, of a journey into the very core of the deepest resentments, where the fates of the entire family, of Gabriel and of Evelyn, would be decided. Gabriel sat in silent contemplation at the old wooden table in the smallest room. The flickering candlelight cast long, whispering shadows on his forehead, silently like unending thoughts. In front of him, Zoe and Lucas sat huddled together, holding hands. Zoe looked haggard, but a determined look flickered in her eyes amidst the tangible fear. Lucas, who had been silent for a long time, finally left his computer, forcing himself to step into reality. He knew this was no longer a problem of machines or the internet, but of real souls that needed to be saved. "We won't just look back at the past," Gabriel said softly. "We will step inside it, facing all that Evelyn once went through. But no matter how strong the emotions of grief or anger are, you must remember who you are and why you are here." He gave Zoe a red ribbon, telling her to tie it around her left wrist. "If you feel you are losing yourself, hold the ribbon tightly and call your name. Call the name of any family member, and you will know you are still here." Lucas received a small silver badge, his mother's old brooch, like a charm of hope that had guided him through all the darkest places he had ever traveled. The ritual began at exactly midnight. The three of them sat around the wide-open diary, right in the middle of a room with closed curtains. Gabriel closed his eyes and mumbled ancient incantations, harmonizing with the deep sound of the wind, the pattering of rain on the porch roof. Suddenly, the entire space swirled, every sound seeming to be sucked into the bottom of a bottomless well. A storm, a cold, echoes breaking all physical laws, and time seemed to stop. Then a heavy weight settled on Zoe's shoulders. She found herself standing in an old house, everything both familiar and strange. Old-fashioned wallpaper, a flickering candle, the rustling sound of people's scared whispers. Lucas was right beside her, trembling as he looked around, clutching the silver badge on his chest. As for Gabriel, though his hair was disheveled, his face wrinkled with worry, he stood firm in front of the two children, his eyes always looking forward, ready to face whatever was about to rise from the depths of memory. Evelyn's figure appeared, sometimes a maiden with sparkling eyes, other times a woman with bloodshot eyes, and a long sigh. They witnessed. Evelyn huddled at the end of the hallway, listening to taunts and ridicule, the sound of her mother's footsteps fading, her brother's angry denial of their shared bloodline, her husband's back turned to her on a rainy night after the false accusation. The hands that once had embraced her now left only a cold tremor. The faces of her loved ones retreated into the mist and then completely vanished, making way for the knocking of villagers, holding fire in their hands, their mouths chanting curses,
planting into her flesh all the resentment they couldn't explain with words. Zoe gasped, feeling every crack that appeared in Evelyn's soul seep into her own mind. Evelyn's tears and wails of despair mixed with Zoe's own blood, making her both want to hug Evelyn and cry, and tremble in fear that she would never return to reality. Gabriel constantly reminded her, his hand always tightly holding Zoe's shoulder. "Don't get lost in that storm, child. That is Evelyn's story, not your fate. Look straight at it, but don't let it swallow you." Lucas tried to stay sane, the memories washing over his head like a violent tide, but he was more resilient than he had imagined. The feeling of pity, the anger on Evelyn's behalf for the injustice, and more importantly, the determination to free everyone from that cycle of hatred, helped him stand firm, giving strength to Zoe. Each scene pushed their breaths closer to the abyss, Evelyn trembling among the shouting crowd chasing her, her black dress tattered in the mud and rain, the faint moonlight glistening on her bleeding mouth from the curses. In the end, in the moment Evelyn voiced her last message on the old closet door, she tremblingly hid a small object under a floorboard, a silver hair brooch, a relic from her childhood, holding all the memories and the deepest resentment of her life. The memory flow shifted sharply, a bright light burst forth, overwhelming all senses. Gabriel, Zoe, and Lucas all realized together, only by finding and destroying this object could they truly free Evelyn from the personal hell she had created for herself. The three of them returned to reality, their bodies exhausted, sweat beading on their foreheads, their hearts pounding in their chests. With a determined and grateful look at each other, Gabriel confirmed in a deep voice, "We have gone to the very end of the darkness. Now there is only one final task, to find Evelyn's silver brooch and end all the hatred that has lingered in this house for so long." Outside, the rain still hadn't stopped, but somewhere, the sigh in the wind was a little softer, as if Evelyn's soul was also waiting with them for the final battle, the battle to free both the living and the tormented soul from the endless cycle of darkness and tears. The Amityville morning was heavy like a curse not yet awake. A pale, murky light lingered in the hallway, seeping through every crack and shadow on the wall as Gabriel, Zoe, and Lucas gathered by the old dining table, their eyes connected by a deep commitment that no one dared to break. They would find Evelyn's relic, no matter what danger lurked. A meticulous search plan was laid out. Gabriel drew the path, based on the chaotic memory fragments that he and Zoe had witnessed during the ritual. Lucas printed out blueprints of each floor of the old house, cross-referencing them with decades-old archival records. Every small detail, a misplaced brick, a bizarre stain, an unusually sealed door crack, became an unmissable link in the chain of clues. The house seemed to come alive, subtly plotting to hinder their progress. Wind began to form suffocating vortices in the dark rooms, and the lights flickered, casting hazy, swaying shadows on the ceiling like a parade of ghosts. A couple of times walking through the hallway, the group clearly heard faint giggling and a steady tapping sound from under the old ground. Zoe's hand trembled in the weak light of her flashlight. Lucas hissed softly through clenched teeth, and Gabriel clutched the old amulet in his jacket pocket. No one dared to look back for too long. Hallucinations attacked them, suddenly and cruelly. Gabriel had to stop many times to calm Zoe when she was pulled into a hallucination. Her eyes blurred, the room spun, and the scene suddenly became a horrifying picture. Zoe saw her mother holding the shadow of a child, with blood staining her chest, James roaring in a dark corner, and Lucas struggling and crying for help, then turning into a lonely child clinging to a collapsed altar. Evelyn's furious whisper in Zoe's ear, "Don't let them steal my last possession." Lucas couldn't escape his own spiritual trial either. In a dark corner of the house, he was surrounded by hovering dark shadows. Evelyn's image emerged, no longer a shadow but of flesh and blood, handing him a broken clock and asking him to answer, "If everything is shattered, would you choose your own family or save a stranger who also knows pain?" Lucas screamed, shattering the darkness, and Gabriel held his shoulders, reminding him that everything was just an illusion testing his will. Gabriel, like the two children, couldn't escape his own past. Somewhere, the voices of his deceased loved ones called out, faces he had lost, promises he had not kept. But he stood firm, using the experience and will of a man who had faced death and real ghosts to keep the group from sinking into the labyrinth of fear. Then came the turning point. Zoe, while fumbling with the wall of the room where they had found the diary, suddenly heard an unnameable sound. The wall was icy cold, and the wind whistled through the rotting wood. In a dizzying moment, she moved closer, her trembling fingernails prying at the old plank. Beneath it, hidden in the darkness, was a small rectangular space, the surrounding mortar already decayed. As soon as Zoe touched it, a cold gust of wind rushed forth. Evelyn's shadow appeared in the wall, her eyes glowing red, her hands reaching out and turning into into claws. The room went dark. Zoe was lifted from the floor in an instant, pulled into a vortex of memory and seething hatred. Lucas and Gabriel rushed to her, Lucas holding onto Zoe's hand, while Gabriel mumbled the incantations he had just learned with all his might. A flash of light burst forth, Evelyn's scream dissolved into the air, and Zoe collapsed into Gabriel's arms, sobbing as if she had just escaped death. When the light stabilized, they opened the secret compartment. A small box lay silently amidst the dust and time, its silver lock tarnished, trembling in Zoe's hands. Gabriel carefully opened it, and inside was an old tarnished silver ring, intricate patterns woven into an endless circle, and a yellowed envelope, the handwriting shaky and thin like a cry lost in space. Gabriel trembled as he read the letter. In it, Evelyn not only spoke of being betrayed by the villagers and her family, but also detailed the agony of losing her only child, of her husband secretly hiding the truth of her bloodline, so that the entire community could stain her honor. It was in that moment of despair that Evelyn had poured all her love, hatred, and soul into the ring she wanted to keep with her until the next life. Whoever touches this place, if your heart still knows compassion, please burn away all the resentment. Otherwise, I will not rest in peace, and you will never know what peace is. But as soon as Gabriel intended to destroy the ring, a cold force radiated out. The space tightened, and all three of them were suffocated by a dark sphere of energy. Gabriel immediately realized that this was a secondary curse, Evelyn's most cruel protection. To break it, they would have to overcome a ritual of sacrificing painful memories, something he himself had never fully performed. The wind suddenly went silent, and the house fell into a bone-chilling stillness. In the corner of the room, Evelyn's shadow appeared one last time, tears of blood streaming down her cheeks, her hand raised, casting a spell on the string of fates. You will have to pay with the very darkness within you, or live here forever like me. Gabriel held Zoe and Lucas tightly. His voice, though strained, did not tremble. There is no turning back. To save Evelyn, to save us, to save this entire legacy of suffering from this hellish loop, we must be ready to put our souls to the test. That night, the three of them sat together, the ring box, the letter, and the silver amulet in the middle, preparing to step into the decisive ritual, the last step of a search, where the line between salvation and annihilation was only a breath away.
The Amityville house no longer seemed to be a dwelling for the living, but had become a body that knew pain, knew how to groan, exhaling cold drafts that brushed against the necks of those who remained in the darkness. Tonight, all traces of the mortal realm seemed to fade. Moonlight penetrating the speckled window panes only painted faint, pale streaks on the floor. The air was thick with anticipation, heavy and tense, just like before the final storm. This was the moment where fate, family, obsession, and hatred converged, pushing everyone to the edge of existence. Gabriel had prepared for the decisive ritual. He had all the items laid out, a circle of white salt surrounding the main room, silver amulets, candles arranged in 4 directions, and Evelyn's silver ring placed at the very center. The man carefully re-examined everything, every carved incantation, every red thread, every small prayer whispered on his lips. Each sign was the final boundary between life and death, between forgiveness and annihilation. Zoe and Lucas sat opposite each other, within the protective circle, their hands tightly gripping their mother's relics, like the last thread holding them together. Gabriel explained each step of the ritual in a firm voice, showing no sign of trembling. The curse is wrapped around this object, like the roots of an ancient tree digging deep into the earth. We must be united, not afraid, and not careless. If anyone falters in this circle, not only Evelyn's soul but all of us will never return to the light. The Harper family sat in a silent circle, their eyes on Gabriel, on Zoe, on Lucas, and on their own souls. They said nothing. No one dared to ask if hope existed, or if they would all turn to ash in the long night. The ritual began. As Gabriel chanted the ancient incantation in a voice hoarse with time, the candle flames suddenly shot up, then died down into blood-colored sparks. The air thickened, every heartbeat merging with an echo from deep within the house. Zoe staggered, her breath hitched, her eyes wide as if swallowing a faint thread of light. Evelyn's shadow appeared again, more intense than ever. She lunged at Zoe, wailing, pulling at every fragment of her mind, recreating all her pain, from when she was a child, when she was ostracized, to the final night she was betrayed by her own blood. The images were blurred with blood, shattered, kneeling in a storm of cursing people. All of it crashed down on Zoe, making her bow her head, her chest tightening, her fingers turning icy cold. They cursed me. It's your turn now. Tomorrow will only be darkness. Lucas burst into tears, his hands gripping his sister's shoulders. Gabriel roared, calling Zoe back. Remember me. Remember your name. Remember that you are Zoe Harper. You are not Evelyn. You are only a person who wants to give Evelyn what she desires most, freedom and forgiveness. Darkness swirled in the room, black smoke wafting, trying to break the circle of bright white salt. Gabriel strained, sweat pouring like rain, his eyes murky, but still burning with an unyielding will. He guided the two children step by step, cutting off Evelyn's screaming with his incessant incantations, a symphony that was both mournful and fierce, echoing through layers of time, through the whistling wind outside the door. At the climax, the silver ring burst into a strange blue flame, and Evelyn's wails, cries, sobs, and insane laughter shattered in the suffocating space. The protective circle shook as if about to explode, everything around it gradually distorting and cracking. Zoe screamed, using all her strength to push away the last of Evelyn's shadow that was clinging to her mind. Lucas held his sister's hand tightly, and Gabriel knelt in the center of the circle of fire, his chanted cries echoing into the pillars of light that anchored the house. Then suddenly, everything flared up, a blinding light filling the entire room. That light broke all screams, scattered all shadows, and pushed the Harper family, Gabriel, Zoe, and Lucas into a prolonged moment of unconsciousness. When they opened their eyes, everything was submerged in absolute stillness. No one knew what had truly happened. Only a suffocated breath remained, and a repressed question erupted from the bottom of their hearts. Had the curse been lifted, or had everything just begun another brutal cycle of trials? Outside the window, the first rays of dawn crept in, but in everyone's heart, a heavy premonition lingered, awaiting the final miracle, or the fateful turning point that destiny held for those who dared to venture into the darkness in search of light. The sunrise the next day seemed to come earlier than usual over the Amityville house, but the sunlight was pale and cold, just like the forced smile of people who had just emerged from a nightmare, unsure if they were truly awake. The space in the house was brighter, devoid of the damp chill, but in everyone's eyes, a lingering suspicion remained. Zoe was the first to wake up. Her body felt strangely light, her mind vague as if all bad dreams had been sucked away. The early morning wind, for the first time in many nights, lightly brushed her hair without leaving a dark trace. However, a thin mist still lingered in the depths of Zoe's eyes. The memories of Evelyn hadn't completely faded. Sometimes, closing her eyes, Zoe still heard a whisper from a far distance, both comforting and haunting, like a red thread wrapped around layers of emotions that hadn't yet dissolved between two fates. Even in her lingering dreams, she still saw the shadow of the woman in the black dress, standing at the end of the hallway, her gaze heavy as if reminding, as if apologizing. That connection, sometimes gentle, sometimes frantic, made Zoe tremble every time she remembered, and compelled her to approach Gabriel with a silent plea. Has everything truly ended? Or was what I witnessed just the outer shell of the darkness? Lucas was different. After the ritual night, he stayed up all night at his laptop, rescanning the entire diary, camera data, chat logs, and supernatural traces to make sure the house was clean of the curse. The more he read, the more Lucas realized the diary was silent, but strange. Never before seen symbols appeared at the corner of the last page, like a hanging question mark, refusing to close. A few old images Lucas retrieved from his hard drive showed a strange shadow outside the window, a certain streak of light imprinted on the wall. All of it made him anxious. If the curse really ended, why are these things still lurking around? Or is there something else waiting for us to face? James and Laura, after a long sleep that seemed to leave no trace, looked at each other bewildered in the kitchen. They exchanged hesitant words, their eyes like two strangers who had just emerged from a great storm, their clothes still bearing the mud of a battle no one could name. James held Laura's hand, his hand rough and cold, but for the first time in months, that trembling was not from anger but from inconsolable remorse. Laura's eyes welled up with tears, feeling as if someone had just removed a heavy stone from her chest, leaving a gaping void. They both knew that to heal, it would take more than a miracle. It would take the courage to face the darkness of their own hearts. In the following days, they sought therapy, quietly rewriting the past, trying to mend the memories that had been traumatized and destroyed by the gloom the curse had planted in every cell of their old home. Gabriel didn't sleep all night. He sat in silent contemplation by the window frame, quietly rereading every line of the diary, pondering the distant origin that was a mix of Evelyn's fate and the Harper bloodline. Early in the morning, when the sun just rose, he took a walk around the house, checking every crack in the walls, every gentle vibration emanating from the old wooden floor. The one who had clung to the curse the longest was also the one most sensitive to the darkness that refused to rest. When re-examining the last letter, Gabriel noticed a faint inscription beneath the wax seal, a very strange last name, H.T. Harper. He suddenly realized Evelyn was not a complete stranger to the Harper family. In the old documents Lucas had researched, Evelyn's husband's last name was Harper, a distant branch that had once settled in Amityville before splitting to another region. Evelyn's injustice was an injustice against James's own bloodline from generations ago. That scarred wound was the root of the violent connection that spanned the darkness, making Zoe, who carried the blood of both families, an unwilling bridge between two abandoned fates. Gabriel froze in the moment of realization. He understood immediately. This was why the hybrid curse, both immensely powerful and persistent like roots piercing the earth, could not be eradicated by just a single ritual. Memory, resentment, and the interweaving of blood were stronger than any ancient ritual. To completely sever it, the Harper family not only had to forgive Evelyn, but also had to forgive themselves, facing and resolving the trove of pain that had been deeply rooted for generations. The story was not just a fairy tale of revenge, but a timeless tragedy of error, division, and the longing to be reborn in true love. That afternoon, Gabriel gathered the whole family. Each person sat quietly together, their eyes a mix of hope and lingering fear. Gabriel placed the letter and the tarnished silver ring on the table, his voice weary but not trembling. Not all prisons are out there. Some prisons are in our flesh and blood, in the memories passed down by our ancestors. Evelyn wants to be forgiven, but we, all of us, must also forgive ourselves to truly be set free. Only when the light of truth is revealed before the altar of memory will all curses truly dissipate. A strange breeze swept through the kitchen, carrying a gentle scent like late-season white flowers, and in their ears was the echo of a soul that had just found peace. But somewhere in the dark hallway, there was still a fresh bloodstain, a sign of a final trial that couldn't be erased. One pristine morning after seasons of rain and wind, the first sunlight spread across the Amityville rooftop, pale but warm, a light the Harper family hadn't felt in a very long time. In the main room, in a space that had once been filled with haunting and resentment, Gabriel sat in silent contemplation, his eyes on everyone. He began to speak, his voice deep and heavy, revealing the greatest secret that many souls had silently protected for generations. Gabriel spoke, each word like a whisper from the other side of time. Evelyn was not just a nameless ghost, but was the very distant ancestor of the Harper family, a branch of kinship that had been severed due to misunderstandings, betrayal, and loneliness, so that by the end of her life she was full of regret, not only for herself but for all those who were trapped in her injustice. The curse she had tied to the house, to the bloodline, was nothing more than a desperate plea, hoping that one day her family would truly hear, understand, and forgive her, so that her soul could finally return to its most gentle original form. The atmosphere in the room was silent after Gabriel's words, only a slight fluctuation of emotional breaths. Zoe, with a heart already full of scars, walked over and stood by the small altar where Evelyn's relics were placed. She whispered softly, "Grandmother, I hear you. I understand the suffering you endured, but the generations that followed, those who were lost in this darkness, not all of them turned their backs on you. We want to learn to love as you once hoped. We want to ask for your forgiveness for all the unintentional mistakes of history. Please let us be forgiven, just as you deserve to be at peace." The space blurred. The sky seemed to change color. In that moment, Zoe clearly felt a desperate voice echoing from the depths of her memory. No resentment, no curses, only a sigh of biting cold that turned into a tear of gratitude. Evelyn appeared at the end of the room, her hair down, her eyes wet and glistening, a faint smile, then she bowed her head and completely faded into the shimmering light. That was the first time her soul had shone brightly like a person who was loved, who was called by name with all trust. Gabriel began the final ritual, not with a heavy incantation, but with stories, beautiful memories of each person in the Harper family recounted to each other within a circle of tightly held hands. From simple breakfasts, cozy winters by the fireplace, to even the mistakes and arguments that now, looking back, they only saw the shadow of love hidden by a layer of angry dust. In that ritual, every positive memory, every hug, every pat on the head, every cheerful laugh became small candles that gradually dispelled the lingering cold. All sorrows and resentments were named and returned to the past. James cried on Laura's shoulder for the first time, no longer from anger but from shame and gratitude. Lucas held his sister's hand, whispering, "If it weren't for you, I think I would have forgotten how much I loved this kitchen table."
Zoe smiled, tears streaming gently, feeling as if a thick mist in her heart had flown away, revealing patches of tender new grass. Then, like a miracle, more than a decade of suffocation vanished in an instant. The feeling of pressure left everyone's chest. The air gradually warmed up. After so many months, the Amityville house, once the tomb of a dream, now seemed to smile gently in the early sun. Every old wall, every wooden door was peaceful as if it had never known a haunting. At the end of the day, as the Harper family sat together, Gabriel packed his bags. His shadow was silent on the porch, sunlight shining on the wrinkled forehead of a man who had lived through countless lifetimes, only to realize not everything supernatural needs to be banished. Some pains only truly disappear when someone is brave enough to forgive and gentle enough to love. Before leaving, Gabriel turned back, his final message echoing in everyone's hearts. Happiness or peace doesn't come from a miracle, but from the very courage to face and forgive the past. Some wounds will leave scars, but they are what remind us to cherish and love more what has once been broken. The Harper family hugged each other tightly. For the first time in a long time, they faced the sunrise together, so that every new day was no longer a fear but a promise to each other. To Evelyn, to the souls that could never find light in a place called home. From that day on, the Amityville house became a place of resurrected happiness, gratitude, and reconciliation, where darkness gave way to a peaceful season with no end.
Sometimes, the most terrifying curse is not in old books, does not come from dark rituals, but begins with the very thing we don't dare to look back at, the past. Evelyn didn't need anyone to bear her pain for her. She just needed someone to dare to listen and understand. The Amityville house was once a cocoon of hatred, but it can also become a place of rebirth if the living know how to forgive, know how to embrace the mistakes they once denied. Don't forget to leave a comment below. I hear it, the voice behind me, and if you feel a cold wind just brush past your neck, click subscribe, turn on notifications, because maybe the next visitor won't be Gabriel, but you. See you again in the upcoming stories, where every soul carries a fragment of memory that we have never dared to face. And if tonight, someone stands at your bedroom door, holding a blood-stained diary, don't open the door, because that is not a person, and it is not a memory.